The doorbell rang at exactly 7 in the morning on a Saturday, which was my first clue that something terrible was about to happen. I stumbled to the door in my sweatpants and old college sweatshirt, rubbing sleep from my eyes. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a rigid silhouette that practically vibrated with purpose. When I opened the door, a blast of February cold hit me along with the sight of a woman in her mid-40s wearing a perfectly pressed purple parka and holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Theodore Emerson?" she asked, though it sounded more like an accusation than a question. "That's me," I said, stifling a yawn. "Can I help you?" "I'm Brenda Patterson, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association." She thrust the clipboard toward me. "I'm here to inform you of multiple violations regarding snow removal on your property." I blinked at her, then looked past her shoulder at my driveway. Sure, there was some snow there. We'd gotten about 4 inches 2 days ago, and I'd been meaning to shovel it, but I'd been stuck in back-to-back meetings at my office in downtown Denver. "It's just a little snow," I said. "I was going to take care of it today." According to HOA Bylaws Section 12, Paragraph 3, all snow must be removed from driveways, walkways, and front steps within 24 hours of snowfall cessation. Brenda's voice had the quality of someone who'd memorized the entire HOA handbook and considered it more sacred than the Bible. "It has been 48 hours. This is your second violation." "Second?" I frowned. "I never got a first violation. We sent an email notification 48 hours ago." She made a mark on her clipboard. "Failure to respond to electronic communications is also a violation. I've been working 80-hour weeks. I must have missed it." "That's not the HOA's problem, Mr. Emerson." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my driveway. "Furthermore, your trash bins are visible from the street, which violates Section 8, Paragraph 7, and your front lawn has not been properly maintained under the snow cover. I can see dead grass patches from here." "Dead grass under the snow?" I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "How is that even possible to prevent? Proper lawn care in the fall prevents winter die-off." She snapped another photo. "That's 3 violations today alone. Combined with your previous violations, you're now at 5 total." Previous violations I never heard about. "Ignorance is not an excuse." Brenda lowered her phone and fixed me with a look that could freeze water. "Let me be clear, Mr. Emerson. At 6 violations, the HOA board has the authority to begin eviction proceedings and place a lien on your property. You're 1 violation away from losing your home." The absurdity of the situation finally penetrated my sleep-fogged brain. You can't evict someone over snow in their driveway. Read your HOA agreement. She pulled out a thick document from her folder and dropped it on my doorstep. "You sign this when you purchase the property. The association has the right to enforce community standards, including through eviction and property liens." "Good day, Mr. Emerson. I suggest you start shoveling." She turned on her heel and marched back down my walkway, her boots crunching in the very snow she was threatening to evict me over. I watched her climb into a white Lexus SUV that probably cost more than I made in a year, despite my position at the trust management firm. That thought stopped me cold. Trust management firm. I picked up the document she dropped, went back inside and made myself a strong cup of coffee. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and started reading. Brenda wasn't wrong. The HOA agreement was ironclad, or at least it appeared to be. Every homeowner in Meadowbrook Heights had signed away an alarming number of rights to an association board that seemed to have unchecked power. But something was nagging at me. I pulled out my laptop and logged into my work system. At Morrison Trust and Asset Management, I was one of 3 trustees who managed various holdings, estates, and financial instruments for high net worth clients and institutional investors. Part of my job involved overseeing residential mortgage-backed securities. I pulled up my files and started searching. Meadowbrook Heights. The subdivision had been built 8 years ago by Crestview Development Corporation. I searched deeper, following the trail of ownership and financial instruments. There. Crestview had financed the development through a series of loans that had eventually been packaged into a residential mortgage-backed security. That security had been purchased by an investment fund. 2 years ago, when that fund had collapsed, the security had been sold at auction to Morrison Trust and Asset Management, specifically to the Morrison Legacy Real Estate Trust, which I personally managed. I started pulling up individual mortgages, my coffee growing cold as I scrolled through hundreds of addresses. Then I found what I was looking for. 2847 Pinecrest Drive, Meadowbrook Heights, Colorado. Brenda Patterson's address, her mortgage, along with roughly 60% of the mortgages in Meadowbrook Heights, was part of the security I controlled. As the trustee, I had the authority to modify loan terms, approve short sales, and in cases of default, initiate foreclosure proceedings. I sat back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. Then I got up, went outside, and shoveled every inch of my driveway, walkway, and front steps until they were cleaner than they'd been since I moved in 6 months ago. I even salted them for good measure. I moved my trash bins to the garage and made a note to check what other nitpicky rules Brenda might use against me, because I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of that 6th violation. I had a much better plan. Monday morning, I arrived at my office in the glass tower on 17th Street and immediately called a meeting with my assistant, Patricia, and our legal counsel, Howard Chen. I need you to pull every mortgage we hold in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision, I told Patricia. Cross-reference them with the HOA board members. I want to know who owns what and what their payment history looks like. Howard raised an eyebrow. What's this about? Potentially abusive HOA practices, I said. I need to understand the full picture before I make any moves. By Wednesday, I had the complete breakdown. Brenda Patterson's mortgage was current, but barely. She'd been late on 3 payments in the past year, each time squeaking in just before the 30-day mark that would have reported to credit bureaus. Her husband, according to the property records, was listed on the mortgage but had filed for divorce 6 months ago. The divorce proceedings were messy. More interesting was the rest of the HOA board. The vice president, Sandra Mayer, had missed 2 payments entirely and was technically in default, though the servicer hadn't moved to foreclose yet. The treasurer, Robert Carlson, had a mortgage with a different lender, so I had no leverage there. But the secretary, Helen Rodriguez, had refinanced through our trust last year. I had power over 3 of the 5 board members. Thursday evening, I received another email from Brenda. This one included professional photos of my property, taken from multiple angles with circles and arrows pointing out supposed violations. My doormat was excessively worn. My house numbers were not properly illuminated. A small branch had fallen in my yard during a windstorm, and I hadn't removed it quickly enough. 3 more violations. That made 8 total by her count. The email concluded with a formal notice. The HOA board will hold a special hearing on Monday, February 20th, to determine appropriate action regarding your continued violations. Failure to appear will result in automatic judgment against you. Eviction proceedings will begin immediately following the hearing. I forwarded the email to Howard. Can they actually do this? I asked when he called me back. Technically, yes, he said, and I could hear him clicking through documents on his computer. Colorado law gives HOAs broad authority to enforce covenants and restrictions. They can levy fines, place liens, and even foreclose on properties. Whether they should do this over minor infractions is another question, but legally, they have the right. What if the board members are acting in bad faith? You'd have to prove that, which is difficult and expensive. Most people facing HOA action don't have the resources to fight back, so the HOAs usually win. Most people, I said slowly, aren't in the position I'm in. Howard was quiet for a moment. Theodore, whatever you're thinking, be very careful. Using your position as trustee to retaliate could expose you and the firm to liability. I'm not retaliating, I said. I'm exercising my fiduciary duty to the trust. If board members are making poor financial decisions or engaging in harassing behavior that could impact their ability to maintain their mortgage payments, that's something I need to address. That's a very fine line you're walking. I know. That's why I need you to make sure everything I do is completely above board. Friday, I sent a formal letter to each HOA board member whose mortgage I controlled. The letter, on official Morrison Trust letterhead and reviewed by Howard, requested a meeting to discuss their mortgage terms and payment history. It was perfectly professional and gave no indication of any connection to the HOA situation. Brenda called me 3 hours after receiving her letter. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "I'm sorry, who is this?" I asked, though I knew perfectly well. "You know who this is, Brenda Patterson. I just got a threatening letter from your company about my mortgage." "It's not a threatening letter, Miss Patterson. It's a routine request for a meeting to discuss your account. The timing is awfully convenient, don't you think? Right after I reported your violations." "I don't follow. What violations?" I could practically hear her teeth grinding. "Your HOA violations. The hearing is Monday." "Oh, that." "I'm not worried about that. The letter you received has nothing to do with HOA matters. It's simply that our trust is conducting a portfolio review, and we noticed some concerning patterns in your payment history. We want to discuss options before any action becomes necessary." "Are you threatening to foreclose on my house?" "Of course not. We just want to talk. Make sure you're in a stable financial position. Ensure you understand your obligations under the mortgage agreement." I paused. "Much like you're ensuring I understand my obligations under the HOA agreement." The silence stretched out for a long moment. "This is blackmail," she finally said, her voice shaking with rage. "I have no idea what you mean. These are two completely separate matters. You're fulfilling your duties as HOA president, and I'm fulfilling my duties as a mortgage trustee. I'm sure a reasonable person like yourself can understand that." She hung up on me. Saturday morning, I received an email from the HOA canceling the Monday hearing due to scheduling conflicts. No explanation, no apology, just a one-line notification. I sat with that for a while, drinking my coffee and watching snow fall gently outside my window. Part of me wanted to let it go. Brenda had backed down. I'd won. But something about the whole situation gnawed at me. How many other homeowners had Brenda bullied with her clipboard and her rule book? How many people had paid ridiculous fines or lived in fear of losing their homes over trash bins being visible from the street? I pulled up the HOA meeting minutes, which were supposedly public record but buried on a barely functional website. It took me an hour to find them all, but once I did, a pattern emerged over the past 2 years. The HOA had filed liens against 23 properties. 17 had resulted in forced sales. In each case, the properties had been purchased by a company called Meadowbrook Property Investments, LLC. I ran the company name through my databases. The LLC had been formed 3 years ago. The registered agent was a law firm in Colorado Springs, but digging deeper, I found the actual ownership buried in layers of paperwork. Brenda Patterson owned 40% of Meadowbrook Property Investments. Her brother owned another 40%. The remaining 20% was split between 2 other investors, one of whom was Sandra Mayer, the HOA vice president. They were forcing people out of their homes and then buying the properties themselves, probably at below market rates due to the liens and forced sale situations. I called Howard at home, which I rarely did. "How illegal is this?" I asked after explaining what I'd found. "Extremely," he said. "That's textbook self-dealing and conflict of interest. If the homeowners who were forced to sell knew about this, they could sue. The HOA board has a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of all homeowners, not to enrich themselves. Could this be criminal? Possibly. It might constitute fraud or conspiracy. You'd need to talk to a prosecutor." Monday morning, I didn't just call a prosecutor. I called my college roommate, Marcus Webb, who now worked as an assistant district attorney for Denver County. "Teddy," he said when he picked up, "it's been forever." "What's going on?" I laid out everything I'd discovered. Marcus listened without interrupting, and I could hear him taking notes. "Can you send me all that documentation?" he asked when I finished. "Already emailing it to you. This is good work, really good work. If this holds up, we could have multiple felony charges here. Wire fraud, definitely. Possibly racketeering if we can show a pattern. How long before you can do something?" "I'll need to review everything, run it by my boss, probably convene a grand jury. A few weeks, maybe a couple months." In the meantime, what do I do about the HOA? Honestly, I'd say lay low. Don't give them any legitimate reason to come after you, and document everything. I took his advice. For the next 3 weeks, my house was a model of HOA compliance. My driveway was immaculate. My trash bins were invisible. I even replaced my doormat with a new one that looked like it cost more than my first car. Brenda left me alone, though I occasionally saw her driving past my house slowly, looking for any excuse to restart her campaign. Meanwhile, I started making discreet inquiries among my neighbors. I knocked on doors, introducing myself as someone who just moved to the neighborhood and wanted to get a sense of the community. People were surprisingly willing to talk once they learned I was interested in their HOA experiences. Thomas and Maria Garrison at 2932 Oakwood had been forced to sell their house last year after racking up $15,000 in fines over their fence color. They'd painted it sage green instead of the approved forest green, and by the time the daily fines stopped, they couldn't afford to keep fighting. Janet Morrison at 3015 Maple had received a violation for having a basketball hoop in her driveway. When she refused to remove it because her kids used it every day, the fines escalated until she had no choice but to take it down and pay $12,000 in accumulated penalties. Robert and Linda Chen at 2756 Birch had nearly lost their home over a flower bed that extended 6 inches beyond the approved boundary. The HOA had demanded they tear it out and pay $8,000 in fines. They'd taken out a second mortgage to cover the costs. Every story made my blood boil hotter. This wasn't about maintaining property values or community standards. This was about systematically terrorizing homeowners until they either paid absurd amounts of money or gave up and sold their properties, which Brenda and her cronies would then buy on the cheap. I compiled every story, every receipt, every piece of documentation the families had kept. Howard helped me organize it into a comprehensive file that I sent to Marcus. "This is even worse than I thought," Marcus said when he called me back. We're looking at potentially dozens of victims. The dollar amounts are in the millions. When can you move? Soon. We're almost ready. In early March, I received another email from Brenda. The HOA was holding its quarterly meeting, and all homeowners were encouraged to attend. Something about the phrasing made me suspicious, so I cleared my calendar and showed up at the community center on Thursday evening. About 30 people were scattered around the room when I arrived. Brenda stood at the front with the other board members, looking like she was about to declare martial law. "Thank you all for coming," she said, calling the meeting to order. "We have several important items to discuss tonight. First, the board has approved a special assessment of $5,000 per household to repave the community streets." A murmur ran through the crowd. $5,000 was a lot of money for most families, especially on short notice. "When is this due?" someone called out. 30 days, Brenda said crisply. "Any household that fails to pay will be subject to a lien and potential foreclosure proceedings." "Can we vote on this?" another voice asked. "The board has the authority to levy special assessments without a general vote," Sandra Mayer chimed in. "It's in the bylaws." I raised my hand. "I'd like to see the quotes for the repaving work. What company are we using, and were there competitive bids?" Brenda's eyes locked on mine, and I saw a flash of anger before she controlled her expression. "That information is available in the board minutes." I've read the board minutes. The last 6 months of minutes don't mention anything about street repaving or soliciting bids. Then you obviously didn't read carefully enough. I'm happy to read them again if you can point me to the specific meeting where this was discussed. The room had gone quiet. Other homeowners were watching our exchange with interest. "Mr. Emerson, if you have concerns about board procedures, you can submit them in writing," Brenda said coldly. "Now, unless there are any other questions, let's move on to the next item." "I have a question," said an older man I recognized as Paul Henderson from 3124 Cedar. "Why are we repaving the streets when we just did that 3 years ago?" "Wear and tear," Robert Carlson, the treasurer, said. "Colorado winters are tough on pavement, but 3 years? That seems awfully soon." "The board has consulted with experts," Brenda cut in. "The repaving is necessary for safety and property values. Now, moving on." She tried to rush through the rest of the agenda, but the room was restless. People started asking more questions. Why was the HOA budget never published in detail? Why had fees increased 40% in 2 years? Why did some homeowners get violation notices for minor issues while others seemed to get away with much worse? Brenda deflected every question with practiced ease, citing bylaws and board authority, but I could see she was rattled. This was clearly not the rubber stamp meeting she'd expected. After the meeting ended, several homeowners approached me in the parking lot. "Thank you for speaking up in there," Janet Morrison said. "Most of us are too afraid. If we make waves, we get targeted with violations." "That's exactly why someone needs to make waves," I said. "What they're doing isn't right. But what can we do? They have all the power." "Maybe not as much as they think." Over the next week, I organized a group of homeowners who'd been victimized by the HOA's practices. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Denver, away from the neighborhood and any potential spying by Brenda or her allies. 23 people showed up. We compared stories, shared documentation, and started building a case that went beyond what I'd already given to Marcus. "The thing is," Thomas Garrison said, "even if the district attorney goes after them, that doesn't help us get our money back or our houses back." "No," I agreed. "For that, we'd need to file a civil suit." "Most of us can't afford lawyers," Maria Garrison added. "Leave that to me," I said. "I know some people." The people I knew included Amanda Calloway, a civil litigation attorney who'd been looking for a case exactly like this one. When I laid out the situation, she practically salivated. "This is a class action lawsuit waiting to happen," she said. "Self-dealing, fraud, harassment, violation of fiduciary duty. We could go after the HOA, the board members personally, and their LLC. What kind of damages are we talking about? Compensatory damages for everyone who paid fines or lost property. Punitive damages because their conduct was so egregious. We could be looking at several $1,000,000. How fast can you move? Give me a week to draft the complaint." Things started happening very quickly after that. Amanda filed the class action lawsuit on a Monday. By Tuesday, a process server had delivered copies to Brenda and the other board members. On Wednesday, Marcus called to tell me the district attorney's office was filing criminal charges. "We're charging Brenda Patterson, Sandra Mayer, and Brenda's brother, David Patterson, with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and theft," Marcus said. "Arrest warrants go out tomorrow." Thursday morning, I was drinking coffee and watching the news when my phone started blowing up with texts from neighbors. I looked out my window and saw 3 police cars parked in front of Brenda's house. I won't lie. I put on my coat and walked down the street to watch. 2 officers led Brenda out of her house in handcuffs. She was screaming about false arrest and lawsuits and police harassment, but the officers just calmly read her rights and put her in the back of a patrol car. Her face was red with rage and, I thought, maybe a little fear. She saw me standing there as they drove past. Our eyes met through the window, and I gave her a small, polite nod. The same scene played out at Sandra Mayer's house and at an address in Castle Rock where David Patterson lived. All 3 were arrested and charged. The news stations picked up the story by that evening. HOA board members arrested in fraud scheme ran as the lead story on every local channel. Reporters camped out in Meadowbrook Heights, interviewing anyone who would talk. I declined to be interviewed, but plenty of other homeowners were happy to share their stories. The narrative that emerged painted Brenda and her cohorts as predatory monsters who'd systematically exploited their neighbors for profit. Public sentiment was not on their side. The legal proceedings took months, as these things do. The criminal trial was scheduled for September. The civil case was moving forward on a parallel track, and through it all, my role as the trustee controlling Brenda's mortgage hung over everything like a sword. In April, Brenda's lawyer reached out to Howard. His client would like to negotiate a settlement, Howard told me, both for the civil case and for her mortgage situation. What's she offering? She'll resign from the HOA board, dissolve Meadowbrook Property Investments, and agree to compensate the victims. In exchange, she wants the criminal charges reduced and wants assurance that you won't foreclose on her house. How much compensation? $2.3 million. Where's she getting that kind of money? She'd have to sell her properties, including the ones she acquired through the forced sales. I thought about it. $2.3 million would go a long way toward making the victims whole, but it wouldn't give them justice. Counter offer, I said. She sells all the properties, pays full restitution based on actual damages, pleads guilty to at least some of the criminal charges and serves jail time. Then I'll agree not to foreclose, provided she stays current on her mortgage payments. She's not going to like that. She can take it or leave it. If she leaves it, we go to trial on both cases, and I start foreclosure proceedings based on the financial instability created by her criminal activity. Her choice. It took 3 more weeks of negotiation, but eventually, Brenda agreed. The final settlement required her to pay $3.8 million in restitution after all the damages were properly calculated. She had to sell 12 properties she'd acquired through the forced sales, plus her share of the LLC. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Sandra Mayer received a similar sentence. David Patterson got 2 years because he'd been more directly involved in some of the financial manipulation. The money was distributed to the victims through a settlement fund Amanda administered. Thomas and Maria Garrison got enough to buy back their house plus additional damages. The Chens paid off their second mortgage. Janet Morrison's kids got new basketball hoop and a college fund. In total, 47 families received compensation. The HOA board was completely dissolved and reconstituted with new elections. The new board's first act was to hire an independent management company and revise the bylaws to include actual checks and balances, homeowner voting rights, and limits on the board's authority. The special assessment for street repaving was canceled when it turned out the streets didn't actually need repaving. Brenda had planned to funnel the money to a company her brother owned. As for me, I kept living in my house in Meadowbrook Heights. My driveway stayed clear. My trash bins remained out of sight. My doormat was respectable, but now when I walked through the neighborhood, people waved and smiled. Kids played basketball in their driveways without fear. Someone on Maple Street planted a flower bed that extended a full foot beyond any approved boundary, and nobody said a word. The community center that had once hosted Brenda's authoritarian board meetings became the site of actual community gatherings, block parties, holiday celebrations. A summer concert series that the new HOA board organized without trying to profit from it. One evening in October, I was sitting on my front porch enjoying the fall weather when Janet Morrison walked by with her husband and kids. "Hey, Theodore," she called out. "We're having a get-together this weekend. Just neighbors, some food, nothing fancy. Want to come?" "I'd love to," I said. "Great. And hey, I never properly thanked you for everything you did." "You don't need to thank me, I just did what was right." Still, a lot of people would have just moved away or kept their heads down. You didn't. That took courage. After she left, I sat there thinking about courage. I wasn't sure that's what it had been. Anger, maybe. Stubbornness. A refusal to be bullied by someone who thought a clipboard and a rule book gave her unlimited power. But maybe that's what courage was sometimes. Just refusing to accept that things had to be the way they'd always been. Believing that someone could make a difference, even when the odds seemed stacked against them. My phone buzzed with an email. It was the monthly mortgage payment report for the Morrison Legacy Real Estate Trust. I scrolled through the list of properties, checking payment statuses. Brenda Patterson's mortgage was current. She'd made her payment from prison, probably through some automated system she'd set up. Even from behind bars, she was honoring her obligations. I suppose that was something. The weekend gathering turned out to be bigger than Janet had suggested. At least 50 people showed up in her backyard, bringing food and drinks and stories. I met people I'd never talked to despite living down the street from them. I heard about jobs and families and dreams that had nothing to do with HOA violations or property values. Paul Henderson, the older man who'd questioned the street repaving, pulled me aside at one point. "You know," he said, "I've lived in 5 different neighborhoods with HOAs and they've all been nightmares to some degree, but I think this one might actually work now." "Why's that?" "Because people realize they have to stay involved, pay attention, not let a few power-hungry individuals run everything. That's a lesson worth learning." He was right. The new board held monthly meetings that were actually attended by homeowners. Decisions were made transparently. Budgets were published online where anyone could review them. Violations were handled with actual proportionality, usually starting with friendly reminders rather than immediate fines. It wasn't perfect. No system run by humans ever is. But it was better. So much better than what Brenda had created. November brought early snow, and I found myself standing in my driveway with a shovel, clearing the latest accumulation. My neighbor across the street, a guy named Frank I'd gotten to know during the whole legal saga, was doing the same. "Hey," he called over. "Want to grab a beer when we're done?" "Sounds good," I called back. Simple neighborly interaction. The kind of thing that should have been normal all along but had been poisoned by Brenda's reign of terror. I thought about how different things might have been if I hadn't been in the position I was in. If I hadn't been a trustee who happened to control her mortgage. If I'd just been a regular homeowner with no special leverage, Brenda probably would have succeeded in forcing me out. I'd have been victim number 48, another person who paid ridiculous fines or lost their home to a rigged system. But I had been in that position, and I had used it. Not to enrich myself or to abuse power, but to create accountability where none had existed. Sometimes I wondered if I'd crossed a line. If using my professional authority in a personal dispute was ethical, even if the outcome had been positive. Howard and I had discussed it at length. He'd assured me that everything I'd done was legally sound. I'd never used my position to threaten Brenda directly. I'd simply exercised my legitimate authority as a trustee to review concerning mortgage accounts. The fact that she'd backed down from her HOA harassment was her choice, not coercion on my part. And once I'd discovered the fraud scheme, I'd had an obligation to report it. That wasn't personal. That was just being a responsible citizen. Still, the timing had been awfully convenient. "You're overthinking it," Amanda had told me when I'd shared my concerns. Bad people often get away with terrible things because good people are too worried about being perfectly ethical. You didn't plant evidence. You didn't make up charges. You just shined a light on what was already there. If that makes you uncomfortable, imagine how uncomfortable it would be for the next family Brenda terrorized. That helped. A little. December came, and with it, the holiday season. The new HOA board organized a neighborhood light display contest that was actually fun instead of being an opportunity to generate violations. My contribution was modest, just some tasteful white lights along the roofline, but the house 3 doors down went all out with a synchronized light show set to music. Brenda would have had a stroke over it. The new board gave them first prize and a gift card to a local restaurant. On Christmas Eve, I got a card in the mail from Thomas and Maria Garrison. Inside was a photo of them standing in front of their old house, the one they'd been forced to sell, which they'd managed to buy back as part of the settlement. "Thank you for giving us our home back," the note read. "Merry Christmas and God bless you." I put the card on my mantle and stood looking at it for a long time. This was why I'd done what I'd done. Not for revenge, though I'd be lying if I said that hadn't been part of it, but mainly for this. For families who deserved to live in their homes without fear. For a community that functioned the way it was supposed to. January brought a new year and a strange kind of normalcy. The criminal trials were over. The civil case was settled. Brenda was in prison and would be for another year or so. Life in Meadowbrook Heights had stabilized into something resembling an actual neighborhood rather than a dictatorship. I'd been living there for a full year now, and I finally felt like I belonged. One cold January morning, I was working from home when my doorbell rang. I answered it to find a woman in her 30s I didn't recognize. "Theodore Emerson?" she asked. "That's me." "I'm Rachel Kim. I'm a reporter with the Denver Post. I'm working on a feature story about HOA abuse and reform, and your neighborhood came up. I was hoping I could interview you." I hesitated. I'd avoided media attention throughout the whole ordeal, preferring to let the lawyers and the court system speak for themselves. "What angle are you taking?" I asked. "Honestly, I want to tell the story of how one person stood up to a corrupt system and won. But more than that, I want to talk about how communities can protect themselves from this kind of abuse. Your neighborhood has become a model for HOA reform. I think other people could learn from what happened here." "Come in," I said. "I'll put on some coffee." We talked for 3 hours. I told her everything, from that first morning when Brenda had shown up with her clipboard to the final settlement distribution. Rachel was sharp and asked good questions. She wanted to understand not just what had happened, but why systems like this exist in the first place. "The problem with HOAs," I explained, "is that they're essentially small governments with very little oversight. They can tax, they can fine, they can even take your property. But unlike real governments, there are often no checks and balances, no separation of powers, no meaningful way for residents to hold them accountable. So how do you fix that? Transparency, real voting rights for homeowners, term limits for board members, independent audits, requiring competitive bids for major contracts, limiting the board's authority to levy fines or assessments without homeowner approval. All the things you'd expect from any legitimate government. And you think that's sustainable? People won't just get complacent again." "Maybe they will," I admitted. "But at least now they know what can happen when they do. Sometimes you need a wake-up call." The article ran in March, spread across 2 pages with photos of the neighborhood, the new HOA board, and some of the families who'd been affected. Rachel had done a good job of presenting the full complexity of the situation, without turning it into a simple hero-villain narrative. Though, to be fair, Brenda had been pretty villainous. The article sparked interest from other neighborhoods dealing with similar issues. Amanda started getting calls from homeowners across Colorado, then from other states. She ended up specializing in HOA litigation, and the last I heard, she'd won several major cases. Marcus got a promotion at the district attorney's office, partly based on the successful prosecution of the Meadowbrook Heights case. He told me they were looking at other HOAs now, investigating whether similar fraud schemes existed elsewhere. "This might have opened a can of worms," he said when we met for drinks one evening. "We're finding problems everywhere we look." "Good," I said. "Better to deal with them now than let them fester." Spring arrived, bringing green grass and flowers and all the usual signs of renewal. The neighborhood looked better than ever, not because of strict HOA enforcement, but because people took pride in their homes and wanted them to look nice. Imagine that. In April, I got a letter from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Brenda Patterson was requesting a meeting with me. She'd been model prisoner, the letter explained, and was eligible for early release. As part of her rehabilitation plan, she wanted to make amends with those she'd harmed. I stared at the letter for a long time, unsure how to respond. Finally, I called Amanda for advice. "You don't have to meet with her," she said. "This is about her rehabilitation, not your healing. If you don't want to do it, just decline." "What would you do?" "Honestly, I'd go. I want to hear what she had to say, but I'm a glutton for punishment." The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday in May at the Federal Correctional Institution in Inglewood. I drove down there feeling more nervous than I'd expected. What was I supposed to say to someone who tried to destroy my life and the lives of my neighbors? They brought Brenda into a visiting room, and I almost didn't recognize her. The imperious woman with the clipboard and the pressed purple parka was gone. In her place was someone who looked smaller, older, worn down by circumstances. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly as she sat down across from me. "I wasn't sure I would. I wouldn't have blamed you if you hadn't." She folded her hands on the table. I wanted to apologize. For everything I did to you and to the others, there's no excuse for my behavior. Then why did you do it? I asked. The question had been burning in me for months. You weren't starving, you weren't desperate. You just decided to terrorize people for profit. Brenda was quiet for a moment. After my divorce, I felt powerless. My husband had left me. My kids barely talked to me. I had this position on the HOA board, and it was the one place where I had control, where people had to listen to me. And then my brother approached me with the investment idea, and it seemed like a way to secure my financial future. I convinced myself I was doing it for the right reasons. By destroying families. I didn't think of it that way. I thought I was enforcing standards, maintaining property values. The people who couldn't keep up, well, that was their problem, not mine. She met my eyes. I was wrong, completely, utterly wrong, and I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I understand what I did. You know how many people you hurt, really hurt, 47 families, according to the settlement. But I think the real number is higher. People who paid fines they couldn't afford, people who lived in fear. I destroyed the sense of community that a neighborhood is supposed to have. We sat in silence for a while. Part of me wanted to rage at her, to make her feel even a fraction of the anxiety and anger she'd caused. But looking at her now, diminished and defeated, I found I didn't have the energy for anger anymore. What happens when you get out? I asked. I'll have to find work, rebuild my life. I've lost almost everything. My house will probably be foreclosed on soon. I can't keep up the payments, even with my lawyer handling things on the outside. The house that's mortgaged through the trust I manage, she nodded. I know you have the power to foreclose whenever you want. I'm not asking you not to. I just want you to know I'm sorry. After the meeting, I drove back to Denver with a lot to think about. Brenda's apology had seemed genuine, but did that change anything? Did it matter that she was sorry if the damage was already done? I thought about the families who'd lost their homes, the money they'd lost, the stress and fear they'd endured. An apology didn't erase any of that, but it was something. A recognition of harm, an acceptance of responsibility. In a world where people rarely admitted fault, maybe that counted for something. Back at my office on Monday, I reviewed Brenda's mortgage file. She was right that foreclosure was inevitable. She was 3 months behind on payments now, with no realistic prospect of catching up. I made a decision that surprised even me. I authorized a loan modification. It reduced her monthly payment to something manageable on a prison salary and extended the term of the loan. It wasn't forgiveness, and it didn't erase her debt, but it gave her a chance to keep her house if she could stay current going forward. Howard thought I was crazy. After everything she did, you're helping her. I'm not helping her. I'm doing what makes financial sense for the trust. A loan modification is better than foreclosure costs and trying to sell a property in a neighborhood that hates her. This way, we keep getting payments. That's your story and you're sticking to it. That's my story. He shook his head but processed the paperwork. Summer in Meadowbrook Heights was everything an HOA neighborhood should be. Kids played in the streets. Neighbors gathered for barbecues. The community pool, which had been off-limits to anyone who'd received violations under Brenda's regime, was open to everyone. I spent a lot of evenings on my porch, reading or just watching the world go by. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced since moving to Colorado. In July, the new HOA board organized a community cleanup day. Dozens of residents showed up to pick up litter, trim common areas, and repaint the playground. We got more done in one Saturday than Brenda's board had accomplished in years, and nobody got fined or threatened. Afterward, someone fired up a grill, and the workday turned into an impromptu party. I found myself talking with Paul Henderson again, both of us nursing beers and watching the sun set. "You know what I realized," Paul said. "This whole thing was never about snow removal or trash bins or any of that stuff. It was about power and control. Brenda wanted to be important and she didn't care who got hurt in the process. You think she really gets that now, maybe. Prison has a way of clarifying things." He took a sip of beer. "But even if she does, it doesn't change what happened. Best we can do is make sure it doesn't happen again." How do we do that? By staying involved, by paying attention, by remembering what it felt like to be powerless. He gestured at the crowd around us, and by building something better. That seemed like wisdom worth holding on to. August brought news that Brenda would be released early for good behavior. She'd serve the rest of her sentence under house arrest, monitored by an ankle bracelet. The neighbors weren't thrilled when they found out, but there wasn't much anyone could do about it. "She has a right to live in her home," the new HOA president, an engineer named Lisa Thompson, said at the monthly meeting. "We don't have to like it, but we do have to respect it. And who knows, maybe she really has changed." Brenda moved back into her house on a Tuesday in September. I watched from my window as she emerged from her brother's car, looking around nervously like she expected a mob with pitchforks. No mob materialized. People went about their business. Some glared. Some ignored her completely, but nobody confronted her or made a scene. A few days later, I was getting my mail when I saw Brenda checking hers. We hadn't spoken since the prison visit. I could have avoided her, pretended not to see her, but that felt cowardly. "Hello, Brenda," I said. She turned, startled. "Theodore, hi. How are you adjusting? It's strange." "Being back, I mean. Everything looks the same, but it all feels different. A lot has changed. I know. I've been reading the board minutes. You all are doing a good job, better than I ever did. We're trying." She hesitated, then said, "I got the notice about the loan modification." "Thank you for that. You didn't have to do it. It made financial sense for the trust. Still, thank you." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, then both turned back to our respective houses. It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't friendship, but it was civil. That was probably the best we could hope for. Fall settled in, bringing cool temperatures and brilliant foliage. The neighborhood looked like something out of a postcard, all golden aspens and red maples against clear blue skies. I'd been living in Meadowbrook Heights for almost 2 years now. It felt like home in a way I hadn't expected. Not because of the house itself, though I liked it well enough, but because of the community we'd built. Because of the knowledge that we'd faced something terrible together and come through it stronger. One October evening, I was raking leaves in my yard when Janet Morrison's daughter, Emily, came riding by on her bike. "Hi, Mr. Emerson," she called. "Hey, Emily. How's school?" "Good, I'm starting basketball next week." "That's great," I gestured at her bike. "Still using that hoop in your driveway?" "Every day." She pedaled off, her laughter trailing behind her. I went back to raking, thinking about all the small victories that made up a life. A kid playing basketball in her driveway without fear. Neighbors gathering without tension. A community where people looked out for each other instead of looking for violations to report. This was what I'd fought for. Not revenge against Brenda, though that had been satisfying in its own way. But this. The ordinary, everyday freedom to live your life without someone with a clipboard and a power complex making everything miserable. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey, I wanted to give you a heads up," he said. "We just got word that 2 more HOA boards are being investigated for similar schemes. One in Aurora, one in Colorado Springs. The work you did helped us identify patterns to look for. How many families are affected? Looks like about 30 in Aurora, maybe 50 in Colorado Springs. Early days still, but thanks to your case, we know what evidence to gather." We might actually be able to shut this down before it gets as bad as it did in your neighborhood." After we hung up, I stood in my yard looking at the piles of leaves I'd raked. It occurred to me that this was what justice looked like sometimes. Not dramatic courtroom moments or satisfying revenge, but slow, steady work that prevented future harm. November came, and with it, my second Thanksgiving in Meadowbrook Heights. The new HOA board organized a community potluck at the community center. I brought a green bean casserole and spent the evening talking with people who'd become genuine friends over the past year and a half. Thomas and Maria Garrison were there with their kids. The Chens brought enough food to feed an army. Janet Morrison's husband, Mike, told terrible dad jokes that had the kids groaning and the adults laughing despite themselves. Even Brenda showed up, though she stayed on the periphery and left early. People were polite to her, but not warm. I suppose that was fair. Forgiveness took time if it came at all. December brought snow and holiday decorations and the now annual light display contest. My contribution was a little more elaborate this year. Some colored lights, a wreath on the door, nothing too fancy. But it felt good to participate without worrying about some arcane violation. On Christmas morning, I woke up in my house that I still owned, in a neighborhood that felt like a community, surrounded by people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side. I made coffee and sat on my couch, thinking about the strange series of events that had led me here. If Brenda hadn't targeted me with her snow violations, I might never have discovered the fraud scheme. Those 47 families might still be suffering. The pattern might have continued until even more people were hurt. Sometimes the universe worked in mysterious ways. Or maybe it wasn't the universe at all. Maybe it was just the intersection of circumstance and choice. I'd been in a position to fight back, and I'd chosen to do it. That choice had consequences that rippled out far beyond my own situation. In January, I got another letter from the Bureau of Prisons. Brenda had completed her sentence. The ankle monitor was removed. She was a free woman, as free as anyone could be with a felony conviction and a destroyed reputation. I saw her around the neighborhood occasionally. She'd gotten a job doing bookkeeping for a small business in Denver. She kept her head down, maintained her property to reasonable standards, and didn't cause trouble. The new HOA board treated her like any other resident. She had to pay her dues and follow the rules, but she wasn't targeted or harassed. When her fence needed repair, they gave her a reasonable timeline and worked with her on the details. In other words, they treated her the way she should have treated everyone else all along. Spring came again, bringing renewal and growth. I planted flowers in my front bed, extending it maybe 6 inches beyond where it had been before. Nobody said a word. The neighborhood thrived. Property values actually went up, not because of strict HOA enforcement, but because people wanted to live in a community that functioned properly. Word got around that Meadowbrook Heights had reformed its HOA, and suddenly, there was a waiting list for homes that came on the market. I'd been living there for over 2 years when I got an unexpected visitor. Rachel Kim, the reporter who'd written the Denver Post article, showed up at my door. "I'm doing a follow-up piece," she explained. "Checking in on how things have changed. Do you have time to talk?" We sat on my porch and I told her about the past year. The successful community events, the transparent governance, the way neighbors looked out for each other now. "What about Brenda Patterson?" Rachel asked. "How's she fitting back in?" "She's here. She's quiet. She does her job, pays her bills, stays out of trouble." "Have you forgiven her?" "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. I don't trust her and I probably never will. But I don't wish her harm either. She's served her time, paid her debt. She gets to live her life just like everyone else." "That's remarkably magnanimous of you." Is it? Or is it just recognizing that we all have to live here together, so we might as well make it work? Rachel's follow-up article ran in March, highlighting Meadowbrook Heights as an example of successful HOA reform. She used our story to illustrate broader principles about governance, accountability, and community building. It sparked another wave of interest. More neighborhoods reached out to Amanda about reforming their HOAs. The Colorado State Legislature started discussing bills to increase HOA oversight and protect homeowners' rights. Our little neighborhood drama had somehow become part of a larger conversation about power and accountability. I tried not to think about it too much. I just wanted to live my life, do my job, enjoy my home, but I was glad we'd made a difference. Summer arrived again, hot and dry as Colorado summers often are. The community pool was busier than ever. Kids ran through sprinklers. The smell of grilling meat filled the evening air. One evening, I was watering my front lawn when Brenda walked by with groceries. We hadn't really spoken since that brief encounter by the mailboxes almost a year ago. "Your lawn looks good," she said, stopping at the edge of my driveway. "Thanks. It's been a good year for grass. Listen, I know I've said this before, but I want you to know I really am sorry for everything. I think about those families every day. The damage I caused, I can't fix it, but I want you to know I understand what I did." "I believe you," I said. And surprisingly, I did. I've been going to therapy, working through why I did what I did. My therapist says I have control issues stemming from childhood trauma. She laughed bitterly. "Turns out there's an explanation for being a terrible person, even if it's not an excuse. We all have our issues. The question is what we do about them." "Yeah," she shifted her grocery bags. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know, and to thank you for the loan modification. I'm staying current on the payments. I'll keep doing that." "I know you will." She nodded and continued walking toward her house. I watched her go, thinking about redemption and whether it was real or just a story we told ourselves. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the point was just to keep trying, keep working to be better than we were yesterday. That seemed like enough. The years that followed were remarkably uneventful, which was exactly what a good neighborhood should be. The HOA continued to function well under Lisa Thompson's leadership. When her term ended, someone else stepped up, and the transition was smooth. I stayed in my house, lived my life, went to work managing the trust. Brenda's mortgage remained current. She became a quiet, almost invisible presence in the neighborhood. Not accepted exactly, but tolerated. Maybe that was the best outcome anyone could hope for. Amanda continued her HOA litigation practice, winning case after case. She became something of a national expert, consulting with legislators and advocacy groups. The changes that started in Meadowbrook Heights spread across Colorado and beyond. Marcus made assistant district attorney and continued prosecuting HOA fraud cases. He told me they'd broken up 4 more schemes similar to Brenda's, recovering millions of dollars for victims, and me. I just kept living. Shoveling my snow within the 24-hour window, not because I feared violations, but because it was the neighborly thing to do. Keeping my property maintained because I took pride in my home. Participating in community events because I genuinely enjoyed them. One evening, several years after the whole ordeal, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Janet Morrison walked by. "Hey, Theodore," she called. "Emily got a basketball scholarship to CU Boulder, just found out today." "That's fantastic. Congratulations." "None of it would have happened if she couldn't have practiced in our driveway. So thank you for everything you did." After she left, I sat there thinking about butterfly effects and unintended consequences. A kid going to college on a basketball scholarship, because I'd happened to be in the right position to stop an abusive HOA board. Life was strange like that sometimes. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Lights came on in houses up and down the street. Somewhere a dog barked. A car pulled into a driveway. Ordinary sounds of ordinary life. This was what I'd fought for. This quiet, peaceful existence where people could just live without fear or harassment. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't going to make the history books, but it mattered. To 47 families who'd gotten justice. To neighbors who could enjoy their homes. To kids who could play basketball in their driveways. Sometimes the most important battles are the small ones. The ones that affect individual lives rather than nations. The ones that don't make headlines but make all the difference to the people involved. I finished my coffee, went inside, and closed the door on another ordinary day in an extraordinary neighborhood. A neighborhood that had been broken and been rebuilt. That had learned the hard way what happens when power goes unchecked and had chosen to do better. Tomorrow I'd wake up, go to work, come home and live my life. Just like everyone else in Meadowbrook Heights. Just like we all deserved to do, and that in the end was enough.